I didn't even remember it was my birthday until the grocery app sent me a coupon for cake mix. 35. Not exactly a milestone. Not a number people throw parties for. I poured myself a mug of herbal tea, skipped breakfast, and buried myself in work pretending the date didn't matter. The sun moved lazily across the sky as I cataloged old property maps from the 1890s, the kind of task that lulled me into forgetting time. That was always the goal: disappear into silence. By early afternoon, my inbox was quiet, my phone untouched. No pings from friends. No awkward messages from old coworkers. Exactly the way I liked it. Then came the knock. 3 quick raps, crisp and decisive. I froze teacup halfway to my lips. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries, no neighbors who ever cared to check in. I waited heart pacing until a curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Only a small brown parcel sat on the welcome mat. No postage, no label. But the blue satin ribbon knotted around it, that shade, that precise tension in the bow, stirred something in my chest. I bent down slowly, my hands already cold. When I picked it up, I saw the handwriting. Not scrawled, not casual, neat, deliberate cursive, elegant loops, sharp angles. My mother's handwriting. I stepped back into the apartment and locked the door behind me. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the box on the counter. For a full minute, I just stared at it. Julianne hadn't spoken to me in nearly 10 years. Not since the night I told her I wouldn't take over the family wellness business. She'd called me ungrateful, emotionally compromised, a disgrace to the Harlow lineage. And now this. I undid the ribbon, peeled back the taped edges, and lifted the lid. Inside was a pristine white tin box nestled in tissue paper. 6 cookies lay within each one, decorated by hand, blue floral icing, symmetrical swirls. They looked professional, beautiful even. There was a card taped to the lid. Let's start over. Love, Mom. I didn't know what disturbed me more, the fact that she'd reached out or the fact that she'd baked. I kept the tin closed for the rest of the day. Every time I passed it on the kitchen counter, my eyes caught the blue icing through the sliver of cracked lid. I didn't throw it away, though I thought about it more than once. It felt like a trick. Like if I got rid of it, I'd somehow prove her right that I was reactionary, spiteful, incapable of peace. By early evening, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I texted Lyra, thinking of swinging by. That okay? She replied in seconds. Of course. Ezra will lose it. He drew you something weird with teeth. The drive out to the suburbs took just under an hour. I kept the tin on the passenger seat unopened like an awkward gift from a stranger I couldn't shake. The sun was low when I pulled into Lyra's neighborhood, where all the houses had matching roofs and wind chimes, swayed gently in porch light. Ezra ran out barefoot as soon as I stepped onto the walkway. "Aunt Selene!" he shouted, flinging his arms around my waist. His hug knocked something loose in me, a kind of warmth I didn't know I missed. Inside, Lyra poured coffee while Ezra set up a zoo of plastic animals on the living room floor. I pulled the tin from my bag and set it on the counter. From her, I said, "Birthday cookies." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Wait, her A's in Mom," I nodded. Apparently she bakes now. Since when? Lyra snorted. She once grounded me for sneaking an Oreo. I didn't eat any, I said quickly. I just couldn't. Ezra's eyes widened at the sight of the cookies. "Can I have one, please?" Lyra glanced at me. I nodded. "Go ahead. Better with you than going stale on my counter." Ezra chose one with a star design and bit into it. "Yum," he announced, mouthful. "They taste like honey." We talked for a while. I stayed longer than I meant to. By the time I left, Ezra had eaten 2 and Lyra had tried 1. The tin was half empty. I drove home feeling almost okay, like I'd offloaded something I didn't want to carry. It was just after 9 when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew the voice the moment I answered. Selene Julianne said smoothly, "How are the cookies? I didn't eat them." I replied, too tired to lie. I gave them to Lyra and Ezra. The pause was sharp, clean, like a scalpel. You gave them what Lyra called just after dawn. Her voice was wrecked, trembling words barely forming through gasps. It's Ezra. He won't stop throwing up. I'm taking him in. He's so pale, Selene, he can't even stand. I didn't hang up. I just grabbed my keys and ran. The drive to Mercy West blurred. Every red light burned into my retinas. I kept seeing Ezra's little face, smeared with blue icing, smiling like he'd found treasure. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel until they ached. By the time I reached the ER, Lyra was already inside with him. A nurse at the desk recognized the name and let me back. Ezra was in pediatrics of 4 and his arm curled on his side like a question mark. Lyra was pacing outside the room. Her eyes were red, her hair a mess. She looked up when she saw me and burst into tears. They don't know what it is, she said. They're running tests. He's dehydrated. They think maybe something he ate. I felt something buckle inside my chest. You had one too, I said quietly. She nodded, her hand pressed to her stomach. I thought I was just tired this morning. But now I'm nauseous, dizzy, Selene. It was the cookies, wasn't it? I nodded once barely. I didn't know. I swear to God, Lyra, I didn't know. She turned away, bracing herself against the wall. I stood there useless. The kind of fear I felt didn't have a name. It wasn't panic. It wasn't guilt. It was something rawer, older. I watched the nurses tend to Ezra through the glass. His little hands clenched into fists, even in sleep. His lips were cracked. I remembered the sound of Julianne's voice, the way she'd screamed what like the end of a sentence. This hadn't been an attempt to reconnect. This was never about forgiveness. I hadn't dodged the bullet. I'd passed it on. I stepped out into the corridor and called the first number I could think of. My voice shook, but I said it anyway. I need to talk to someone about a poisoning. I didn't sleep that night. After hours at the hospital, after watching Ezra's tiny body convulse from something I had unknowingly delivered, I drove home in silence too hollow for tears. My apartment felt sterile. Every object seemed unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. I went straight to the hall closet, yanked down the old cedar box from the top shelf, and carried it to the floor. Inside were the journals I hadn't touched in years, spiral-bound margins scribbled with sketches and taped-in notes from school. I started flipping through, not really knowing what I was looking for, only that my hands moved faster the longer I searched. The first entry that stopped me was from when I was 8. Mom said the tea would help me stop overreacting. It tasted like dirt. I had stomach aches all week. The next was 2 months later. She made me eat the red cake again. I didn't want to. I cried and said no. She locked the door and said I could come out when I finished every bite. I remembered that day. I remembered the smell, cloying, unnatural, and the dull ache in my stomach that never went away until morning. I read faster. Tea for focus. Cookies for obedience. A juice that made my limbs heavy if I talked back. It had all been written down by a child who hadn't understood what was being done to her. And woven through every entry were her phrases. You need to be clean inside. Emotions are clutter. Sweetness is earned. It hit me like a second wave, harder than the first. This hadn't been discipline. This wasn't just control. It was a system. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and scrolled to Lyra's name. Before I could press call, a new message lit up the screen. Unknown number. You were always the strong one, Selene. That's why I started with you. The next morning, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Selene, a woman's voice said, hushed but firm. This is Lenora. Lenora Castle, your father's sister. I hadn't heard that name since his funeral. She'd shown up wearing black lace gloves and left before the wake ended. We'd never spoken since. I saw Ezra's name listed under pediatric toxicology in the registry. She continued, I still have a contact at Mercy West. I knew something like this would happen. My breath caught. You knew I knew Julianne was dangerous, she said. That woman doesn't believe in healing. She believes in control disguised as medicine. I waited, not trusting my voice. She was investigated once, Lenora said. Back when she had that wellness clinic in Cottonwood, there was a patient elderly diabetic. Julianne insisted on cleansing treatments using her own herbal blends. The woman went into cardiac arrest, died within hours. They couldn't prove intent, but I read the records. Her ingredients weren't standard. Some of them were borderline toxic. I gripped the arm of the couch. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I tried, she said. But no one believed me. Julianne was charming, clean, licensed. I was the bitter half-sister with family issues. She had a way of rewriting the narrative before I could open my mouth. "I need everything you have," I said, "please. Anything that can help me protect Lyra and Ezra." There was a pause. "I still have copies of the Cottonwood file," she said slowly. "I kept them all these years just in case. But Selene, this goes deeper than the clinic. There were whispers even before that, about what she was doing at home, about how she treated you girls." I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing in. "I'll come to you," she said. "You're in Flagstaff, yes. There's a rest stop diner off I-40 just outside Holbrook. Quiet. I'll be there tomorrow at noon." As the line clicked dead, I looked down at my phone. A new message had arrived while we were talking. Just a single word. Unclean. I drove to Winslow before the sun had fully climbed the horizon. The desert was bone dry and colorless, a quiet kind of dread stretching across the road. I hadn't been to the house in almost 12 years, not since I'd packed my things in silence and told her I was leaving. Not since she stood in the doorway with a teacup in one hand and a look of cool disappointment in the other. The key was still hidden under the flower pot by the shed, exactly where she'd kept it since I was a teenager. I let myself in. The house was spotless, but the air inside felt wrong, too still, like nothing had breathed in it for days. The kitchen was just as I remembered, granite counters, labeled jars, hand-woven mats under everything. But it was the basement I came for. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended. At the bottom, the air turned colder. A metal freezer hummed softly in the corner. I opened it. Inside, cookie tins were stacked neatly in rows. Each had a label pressed into the lid. Ezra. Trial A. Lyra. Responsive. Selene. Control. Batch 3. There were vials, too. Some clear, others opaque, each labeled in the same tight script. Valerian. Monkshood. Bitterroot. Foxglove. I turned to the far wall where a tall cabinet stood locked. I forced it open with a screwdriver I found on the workbench. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, columns, charts, dates. One read, "Emotional volatility can be dampened with Bitterroot plus Monkshood. Compliance increases by day 3. Another listed meal schedules, names, dosages. There were graphs tracking behavior fluctuations, mood, sleep, and resistance. My name appeared most often always under long-term observation. My knees nearly buckled. I sat on the cement floor, breathing hard, the papers trembling in my hands. It hadn't been discipline. It hadn't even been parenting. It was a trial. I had been a living test. On the workbench sat another tin, unlabeled, sealed, tight. Still faintly warm to the touch. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A voicemail transcribed automatically from Julianne. "Selene, you shouldn't be there. You're interfering again." I didn't plan to confront her. I had meant to stay in the shadows, gather evidence, do it the right way. But when I walked into Ezra's room and saw her sitting beside his bed, like she belonged there, stroking his hair, humming, I felt something inside me ignite. "Get away from him." I said louder than I expected. She didn't flinch, just turned to me with that familiar, faint smile. "You're tired, Selene. All of this grief projection. It's exhausting, isn't it?" "You poisoned them," I said. "You poisoned me." Julianne stood slowly, smoothing her blouse. "I gave you tools to survive. You were always my strongest subject. Ezra was never meant to be part of this. Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why him? Why us?" Her gaze sharpened. "Because you were my final design. and you broke the cycle." I stared at her, heart pounding. "You treated us like experiments." "No," she said, voice cool, "like investments." Security arrived before I could say anything more. She didn't resist as they led her away. Her parting glance held neither fear nor guilt, just disappointment, like I'd ruined something delicate. Later, Detective Maeve Rourke met me in the hospital hallway. She was lean, unsmiling, the kind of person who didn't bother with small talk. She listened as I showed her the photos I'd taken from the house, the labeled tins, the handwritten formulas, the freezer contents. "It's compelling," she said slowly, "but unless we can link the cookies directly to the poisoning through lab tests or residue, it won't hold in court. They're in Ezra and Lyra's systems. Monkshood, Bitterroot. We know what it was. We suspect she corrected. But suspicion doesn't get us a warrant or an arrest." I looked through the glass at Ezra still sleeping beneath warm blankets, his skin pale and paper thin. Lyra sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. I turned back to Rourke. "Then I'll find what you need." She didn't argue, just handed me her card and walked away. I left the hospital that night with one thing clearer than anything else: she wasn't done yet. Lenora met me in the back of the diner, her eyes sunken but steady. She slid the journal across the table without a word, and I opened it with trembling hands. The cover was soft with age, the leather cracked at the corners. Inside, Julianne's handwriting bloomed in tight, methodical rows, precise, emotionless. Page after page of philosophies she had never spoken aloud to us, only applied. Emotional immunity must be trained, not inherited. Sensitivity is a flaw. Attachment corrupts logic. Western parenting relies too heavily on indulgence. Love must be calibrated to foster obedience. Then a header scrawled across an entire page in red ink: final candidate Selene Harlow resistant, but malleable. My name repeated again and again beneath that heading in charts and timelines and chemical breakdowns. A dosing schedule ran along one page marked with outcomes: mood stabilized, verbal rebellion, withdrawal, compliance. I read the entries like someone standing over their own autopsy. Lenora reached across the table and placed her hand on mine, but I couldn't speak. It hadn't been love. It hadn't even been misguided parenting. It had been a long clinical experiment, and I had been the test subject she couldn't quite perfect. Later that night, I got the call from Detective Rourke. "The toxicology report just came back," she said. "It's monkshood, aconitum, in both Ezra and Lyra's bloodstreams. Traceable. Confirmed." My breath left my body in a single painful exhale. She's in custody, for now. But Selene, she's not talking. Not to me, not to anyone. I could hear Rourke flipping through pages on her end. The moment we read her rights, she went silent. Lawyered up with a man I've seen defend pharmaceutical executives. She's not acting like a healer. She's acting like someone with something to lose. I stared out my window at the streetlight flickering over the curb. A child's scooter leaned against the building across the street. Ezra had one just like it. "She won't win," I said. "She can't. We'll need more than a motive," Rourke said. "We'll need proof of intent." I closed the journal on the table in front of me. It thudded like a stone. The first time it happened, I was rinsing out a mug. A sharp metallic taste coated my tongue, followed by a wave of nausea and a pulse behind my eyes. I sat down, gripping the table until it passed. At first, I blamed stress, late nights, too much coffee, not enough sleep. But when I blacked out in the hallway and woke up with a bruise on my shoulder, I knew it was something else. At the ER, the nurse was kind. The blood work was quick. When the doctor returned, his face had changed. "Trace amounts of aconitum," he said. "Same substance your nephew and sister were exposed to." I couldn't speak. My mind reeled back to the day I'd visited Julianne's house, the coat I wore, the cookie tin I never opened. I remembered brushing something from my pocket that night. Crumbs. Or so I thought. She hadn't needed me to eat them. She'd counted on my carelessness. She'd left just enough behind. I requested a visit. At the county detention center, they led me to the glass. Julianne was already there, hands folded, eyes bright. She looked pleased. "You don't look well," she said, picking up the phone. "You did this," I said. "Even from behind a wall, you still found a way." She leaned in, her voice low. "You'll never be anything without me," she whispered. "I'm already inside you." I hung up. I walked out without looking back, the file Detective Rourke had sent earlier folded in my bag. Inside, it was a single sheet of paper from an archived civil case, a name I hadn't seen since I was a child, one that had appeared in Julianne's notes again and again. The woman who died during one of her first cleansing treatments, the one no one believed had been poisoned. It took months, but we got out. We left the apartment, the old neighborhood, the shadows that clung to everything. Lyra and I signed the lease together, and for the first time in our adult lives, we chose a place where the past couldn't follow us through the front door. Ezra recovered faster than any of us. Kids do that. Their bodies bounce back. Their hearts take longer, but he was surrounded by softness now, by honesty, not manipulation. He asked fewer questions as the weeks passed, though. Every now and then I'd catch him staring at a plate of food just a little too long, trying to decide if he could trust it. I started a group online. It was quiet at first, just a few strangers on video calls, eyes down, voices low. Survivors of healing homes, of Reiki-obsessed fathers and mothers who used vitamins like threats. We called it unseasoned. Some days we didn't even talk. We just sat baking banana bread or kneading dough with our screens on, reclaiming rituals that had once meant fear. I wrote the article at night, always by hand first. I didn't name her, I didn't name me, but it was all there, what it meant to be shaped by someone who saw you as material instead of a person. I ended it with a single line. Love should never come with conditions. Real sweetness is given freely, not forced down bitter. The morning it was published, I baked cookies. Ezra wandered into the kitchen halfway through, rubbing his eyes. He stood on his tiptoes to peek at the tray cooling on the counter. "Are these cookies safe?" he asked, not quite joking. I crouched beside him. "They are, and next time you can help me make them." He grinned, and I felt something shift. Not a grand catharsis, just a quiet rebalancing. Maybe healing doesn't come all at once. Maybe it doesn't even feel like healing when it starts. Maybe it looks like dough under your nails, a child's laughter, the smell of cinnamon filling a space no longer haunted. Maybe it begins with choosing the recipe yourself.